in a word, basically, I was traveling in Argentina. I was on top of a mountain. I couldn't breathe because the air was so thin. I got really scared, and so I sat up all night reading a book in Spanish. And the next day, I remembered a bunch of Spanish because of the
Okay, so
story. So it
I
turns
got
out,
to stop you there for a second. I think you're onto something. All we need to do is oxygen deprive people, get them exhausted, teach them a whole bunch of Spanish and stories, and we have a whole bunch of polyglots running around the planet.
yeah, you figured out the ultimate language learning secret. Um, yeah, but the amazing thing about this story is like you wouldn't believe.
Welcome to 7 to 8, our special series on 7 to 8 figure entrepreneurs. In this special series, I interview $1 million, some $10 million, and even some $1 million business owners who uncovered their twists and turns in their entrepreneurial adventure in order to help you to avoid the potholes and stick to the fast track. Welcome now to Center Stage, our next special guest. Hey there, peeps. This is Michelle Nedelec, and I'm super glad to have you here with us today because I'm here with my most amazing guest, Olly. Olly, thank you so much for being here with us today.
What a pleasure. Great to see you.
Awesome. So give everybody a highlight of who you are and what you do for business.
Yeah, so thanks. My name is Olly Richards. I'm from the UK. I'm most known for my business StoryLearning, which is a foreign language education company. I started it basically from a passion. So I've had a whole series of 7-year careers. I spent 7 years as a musician. I used to play jazz piano, and I spent 7 years teaching English, and now I spent 7 years, well, more like 10 actually, because I quite enjoy this one, building my language business. And it just started from blogging about languages. I've always enjoyed learning languages. It's been a little hobby of mine. And so one day in 2013, I just started a WordPress blog, started blogging about languages. I took the whole blogging thing quite seriously. I learned how to grow it, monetize it, and now 10 years later, we are far larger than I ever thought we'd be. And so recently, I started a newsletter, a business newsletter, where I write about the various things that I'm doing to grow my company and helping other people who are in the online business space.
Very cool. So tell me more about the software that you're working with then.
Yeah, no. So it's not software. So it's online
Right.
courses and
Okay.
books. That's the main thing that we do at StoryLearning. So, for example, if you wanted to learn, so it might help to kind of backtrack a little bit. So
Yeah.
the language learning industry is a very big one. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. Like, every man and his dog is learning French or something, And so the way that we approach this is, one of the main things that I talk about and teach in my business stuff actually is the importance of crafting the magic, often referred to as, USP, but crafting the magic of your brand being the thing that separates you from everyone else. And so in the language space, we've got huge amounts of competition from companies like Duolingo, Rosetta Stone, that everyone has heard of. And so specifically at StoryLearning, we teach languages through stories, and that is our particular niche. And we do this in lots of different ways, but through our content, through our online courses, and through our books, the golden thread that runs through all of that is stories. And so we create this very kind of high level of coherence through the brand, through everything we do, and it's all embedded in courses. But fundamentally, we're teaching people languages through lots of different mediums: books, courses, content, podcasts, things like that.
I love it. When my son was little, it was funny. I was going, "Oh, why don't you read the book?" And so he read the book, and I realized he's clearly not reading the book, but he's telling me the story. So he's got the story memorized, and he's telling me the story. I'm like, that is kind of genius, and I'm not going to diss you for that. But it was great because it's how he learned how to read. It's how he learned how to speak French. It's how he learned how to do a ton of stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm a huge fan and a huge advocate of it. So tell me your reasoning. Why is story more fundamental than going through, these are the verbs, this is how you conjugate them? I think just in my
Yeah.
explanation, an answer to that. But
Yeah, well, I mean, so what you said is how most people's experience of learning languages at school, right? So you have 30 kids in a class, you have lots of your teacher gives you a list of words to learn, big grammar explanations on the board, and to be clear, this does work for some people if you have that particular kind of brain, very analytical, practical, systematic brain. Yeah, that can work. Truth be told, I mean, I don't mind learning in that way myself. It kind of works for me. However, the vast majority of people that learn a language at school get nowhere. And this is just evidenced by looking at everyone around you everyone did languages at school. How many people do you know who speak fluent? I mean, being in Canada, maybe you know more than most. But in most countries, in the UK and the US, it's just it's abysmal. And so the thing with stories is that stories kind of really just tap into the way that we learn languages, but also learn anything most naturally. Even from if you think back to cave drawing, what are they doing? They're telling a story of something that happened. When politicians want to accrue power, they tell stories, they create narratives. Stories are how we communicate. And so I think when we talk about learning languages through stories, it makes very strong intuitive sense to people that it should work, even if they're not quite sure why. The idea of learning a language through stories, it works on a level of marketing, which is fortunate for us, but also it happens to work really well too, because as you say, stories make you remember things because our brains are preconditioned to remember stories. So if you're reading a story in French, for example, knowing the words is one thing, but the words when you're first learning can be very abstract. What's not abstract is the story itself, because stories all follow a set number of similar formats. You have the hero's journey and so on. And so when you combine the word and the grammar of a language with a story, it just gives you glue to stick the language onto, and it helps it to be retained.
Nice. So you're working now, correct me if I'm wrong, with online educational systems to be able to help them to market their businesses. Yes.
Yeah, so I mean, essentially, what I do is all I do is a newsletter. I mean, I don't have a kind of business behind this really. Yeah, because the thing is, so what I found was after like 10 years of figuring out how to grow, when I've grown StoryLearning into a $10 million business, and it's been such a difficult, confusing, emotional journey to do this. The amount that you have to learn, the amount of comfort zones you have to exit, it's like so many of us entrepreneurs, we exist in these silos, and we have no real outlet for discussing this stuff that we spend all day every day thinking about. And because I'm a teacher at heart, which is why I started teaching language in the first place, for a long time I've just had this real kind of urge to just talk about the things that I've been doing to grow my main business for a long time. And so this time last year, I started a newsletter, and simply every week I just write about the kind of stuff that we're up to, everything from how we sell expensive products over emails, on a personal level, how I think about mindset and lifestyle questions, how we think about product and product ecosystems and various different business model strategies. Whatever's on my mind, I just write about, and it's a very I find it very, very rewarding to do that.
Love it. So when it comes to kind of the storytelling aspect and the overlap into, let's call it the marketing realm or business realm, let's go and start with the business realm, a bigger genre of kind of whatever direction you want to take this. You touched on the stories are important because it's that innate part of us that we lean in and listen to it. But when I find a little bit of a pushback in the industry that it's like, yeah, people lean in and listen, but then they don't do anything. It's like, oh yeah, that was a really great story. Thanks. Yay, you did great. I heard one speaker say the worst thing people can do at the end of your talk is give you an applause, because they're thinking, yay, you did this. This is great. As opposed to, okay, what do I do and where do I go and how do I sign up? So talk to me about that kind of that transition, if you will, from story to call to action.
That's a really good question. So stories are, the way I think of stories are not so much like a trick, but more about a mode of communicating in general. And so, it's within, let's say you're giving a talk at a conference. Well, to include a story as part of an overall presentation is a really great idea, and it can even be a major part of that. But the presentation itself has a purpose, most likely, which is to get people to sign up to something or to subscribe to you on YouTube or wherever it may be. So the story in itself is not the thing that necessarily leads to a specific action, although it can. What story does for me is it serves to attract the ideal person to you in a way that they wouldn't otherwise do. So for example, when I talk about, when you asked me before to talk a little bit about myself, I told you a little bit about how I used to be a jazz musician and how I used to be an English teacher and traveled. This is my personal story, and it's, for many people, they will hear that and it won't resonate with them in any way. But for people who are education entrepreneurs in particular, who tend to be teaching their passion, who tend to value, who tend not to be a kind of all about money type person, and they tend to value lifestyle and education and teaching equally. For someone to hear that I've been through these different phases immediately is going to make them pay attention and to empathize with me more than, ex guru just shouting at you from the stage. And they're going to remember that. In my language business, I tell this story about how I first discovered learning languages through stories. And I won't tell you the whole story here. It will bore everyone to tears. But in a word, basically, I was traveling in Argentina. I was on top of a mountain. I couldn't breathe because the air was so thin. I got really scared, and so I sat up all night reading a book in Spanish. And the next day, I remembered a bunch of Spanish because of the story.
So
it turns
I got
out,
to stop you there for a second. I think you're onto something. All we need to do is oxygen deprive people, get them exhausted, teach them a whole bunch of Spanish and stories, and we have a whole bunch of polyglots running around the planet.
Yeah, you figured out the ultimate language learning secret. Yeah, but the amazing thing about this story is, like, you wouldn't believe. I started telling this story because I heard it was good for marketing to have an origin story, right? So I did it. You wouldn't believe how often people come up to me at conferences and events and said, "Oh, I know about your story on top of the mountain." I'm like, wow. And it's absolutely stunning just how much that resonates with people. And it's there's no explanation for this other than the fact that stories are the thing that you remember. Facts and snippets of information are so easy to forget. They're 10 a penny, but stories stick with you. And stories are what right now we're in the middle. There's a lot of bad stuff going on in the world. What drives all of that is the story and the narrative of the people and the countries and the cultures involved. So, stories they're not a sales technique in and of themselves, but they add a kind of layer of magic that will make it so that people pay attention to what you do.
Absolutely. And I want to take you into that kind of the intentionality of the story, because I remember a great story. I think it was Robert Allen that was telling the story of when he was going up to a mountain, and they had just built a new house up in the mountains, and it was on fire, and they're freaking out. So he's driving up to the mountains, panicking whether or not his wife's okay. And I remember the story and all the details, but I have no idea why he told that story. To this day, it drives me crazy that I can't remember why he told me the story. And I think there's a beauty and a magic of, when I remember your story, I know, hey, like, I will forever and always now remember, if I climb to the top and read a book in Spanish, I might have a chance of remembering more of it, which then leads me to, oh yeah, right, I got to talk to Olly about, like, I attach the aspect of learning a new language and learning to you because of that story. So is that kind of always important? Is it sometimes important?
Yeah.
And how do you get that if that's the intention?
It's a fantastic question. So this is fundamental. So the best exercise for people to do is to think of is simply to create their origin story. So for everyone listening, if you don't currently have an origin story, then your top priority first thing tomorrow morning is to figure this out. And then this should become the thing that the story that you tell every time you write the about page on your website, you introduce yourself on a podcast, you explain to someone what you do. And the origin story needs to be true, although I think there's room for artistic license, for creative license in there. It doesn't need to be, stories are always exaggerated for effect, but it does need to be true, right, obviously, in order for you to maintain your authenticity. But what the story needs to do, ideally, is the story needs to communicate the same journey that people will go on when they actually use your product or service, because then it's easy for the audience to actually to link the story with the outcome that you're trying to that you want to offer them. And so, you know, with your friend's example about climbing the mountain, you know, it's very telling that you remember that story. Imagine now if the story was actually connected to the thing that he was offering, right? It would be that much more powerful. So what we want to try and do is to make it so that our origin story tracks exactly with the process or method that we actually teach. And that's often where a little bit of creative license might be required in order to make that fit snugly. But this is where the kind of art and the science kind of combine, right? Because we want to tell the story because it's effective and it's truthful, but it also conveys the thing that we're trying to actually offer as a service or a product.
Absolutely. Well, and the antithesis of that is telling a story that has nothing to do with it, and people are going like, I'm totally never buying from you. This just doesn't make any sense. I have had people go, you know, hey, I do this thing and it's awesome, you need to come and do this thing. The way I got into this was I got a buyout and I bought the franchise. It's like, yeah, we're not doing that. Like, there's a huge disjunct there in this story that people just don't relate to, and it has the opposite effect to it. And
then, so the layer above the story itself is the storytelling. And, you know, personally, I always let out a audible groan whenever I'm at a conference and someone gets on stage and the first thing they do is put a picture of themselves up on the screen, and it's like, here I was broke in a trailer and at 33, and you know exactly what's coming. It's the sob story. It's the sort of zero to hero transformation. That's doing it for the sake of it, and it's just very, very transparent. To get like the real challenge is to actually learn to weave the storytelling into what you do naturally in a way that doesn't make people groan. And you know, telling a compelling story is I'm not particularly good at this, actually. I don't consider myself a great storyteller at all. The people who know how to tell stories rule the world.
Well, and I think too, people need to understand it's not necessarily something you're born with, although there are people that are just naturally, hey, talk about this, and they can do it. But I think that's a skill that they've honed in on, and really to have the good ones, it's kind of, okay, slap it down, write it down, rewrite it. It's like an artist with a piece of charcoal. You add on, you take off, by the time they're done, it looks nothing like what they started with.
Absolutely. There's a fantastic book called a guy called Michael Haig, who is a Hollywood scriptwriter, and I forget the name of the book, but if anyone, it's The Art of Storytelling or something like this. So if you Google Michael Haig, Hague, I think, storytelling, that it's really, really fantastic. And you read his stuff and he'll tell you about, for example, when you're telling a story, what are the key things to emphasize? And so, for example, one of the things that people tend to underplay when they're telling a story is that, so in any great story, you've got a moment of ultimate danger, right? Where the hero is about to lose everything. And you see this in every single movie plot. So in my story about being, I didn't tell you the mountain story properly because it's not the right time or place.
Interrupted you.
No, I glossed over it. But in my mountain story, the moment of danger is that, you know, because of the altitude, I can't breathe, and I genuinely was standing on this top of this mountain, and I thought it was the end because I couldn't get oxygen into my lungs. And this is 100% genuine. When I'm telling the story within the language business side of things, I will over dramatize that point more than I would naturally, because of what I learned from people like Michael Haig, which is that the danger of underplaying that key moment is that in the narrative arc of the story, you suck all of the power out of the tension that you've been trying to build throughout the story. And people always do this because they're not comfortable as storytellers. But what you actually need to do is really lean into that dramatic moment, because that's what makes the story, when everything's all right in the end and the hero kind of recovers and wins the battle. That's the resolution of the story. And so by studying just some small storytelling techniques, you learn to create a much bigger impact on the listener.
I love it. Well, and oftentimes it can be the pregnant pause, and sometimes it's a little more complicated than that, but there's so much to that. I find it absolutely fascinating. So in all your things, you talk about the loyalty that you can create with a brand because of the storytelling. Is it solely because people are remembering the stories and they're going, oh yeah, and it's kind of driven back to you? Well, you being the royal you, or is there something else about it that drives that loyalty?
Yeah, so I mean, in the case of the language business in StoryLearning, I mean, stories are it's not just a marketing technique; it is actually the methodology of the program. So within our courses, we use stories to teach languages. So the way that I think about this is we very much create a world. So before I explained to you a little bit about how our content, our books, and our podcasts and stuff all use stories as the teaching method. When you first discover us, the proposition that I'm kind of laying down to a prospective language learner is basically, look, our thing is we teach you a language through stories, not rules. That's the game. You're welcome to come and join us if you want. Once someone crosses the threshold, comes over and starts learning with us, they will find it either works for them or it doesn't. Obviously, no one has 100% success rate. But for the people who it does work for and who enjoy learning a language with stories, what we then do is we offer a huge pathway for continuing to learn. So I have what I call an ecosystem of products, which includes front-end products, which are the more predictable things like your Spanish level 1, Spanish level 2. But then on the back end, we have a different types of offers, which help fulfill different parts of the business model case. So we have standalone offers that will be a one-time payment, and then we have continuity offers where there's a monthly payment, and then we have very high ticket items like certifications and coaching and things like that. I see it as a choose your own adventure type model. So a lot of people talk in terms of value ladders and ascending someone as quickly as possible up to the top of the value ladder. That's not what I do at all, because in the education space, learning takes time, especially something like language learning. It can take years. And so what we want to do as a business really is be present and there and available for people along their language learning journey. And it may be that there's 3, 6, 12 months between when they need to take the next step. And so what we do is we create this ecosystem of different products, all of which use that exact same story-based methodology. And so the reason that it works for people to keep coming back to us is because now that they've bought into the magic and they understand how it works and that it works for them, it would be the most logical step is to continue to learn with us, because everything we make uses that same methodology. It would make no sense to go off to somebody else at that point. And so what we try to do is craft this DNA throughout everything we do to offer people this world that they can just go off and explore for as long as they want to keep learning.
Awesome. So with that business, you ran a $7 million business, yes?
Not 7. I wouldn't say 7.
8, 9, bigger.
It's a $10 million business.
Nice.
If I had to total up the revenue over the years, I've got absolutely no idea.
We won't audit you, I promise.
Yeah.
So in that, what was the difference for you? Was that your intention right off the get-go? Was, hey, we're going to run a $10 million business? Or, hey, this looks like fun. I think I might want to go into business for myself. What did that look like?
So listen, it was all completely organic. So when I started off my main business, StoryLearning, it was just a blog. I wasn't even monetizing it for the first 2 years, nothing. I've always been someone who finds stimulation and motivation in progress, in growth, moving forward, whatever the next step is. I think it's kind of hardwired into a lot of us. I've always found that whatever stage I got to, I just wanted to reach the next level. So when I was at 6 figures, I wanted to reach 7 figures. When I was 7 figures, I wanted to reach 8 figures. And I think these milestones, to a large extent, are completely arbitrary. But I find it motivational because I want to know always the thing that I don't know. And so I think there are 2 things in particular that I would say have helped me with that. The first is simply time. And I think people don't appreciate the importance of time in the growth process, because whatever challenges you're facing right now, you will overcome them in time. So not being in a huge, crazy rush really works to your benefit. The second has been the role of coaches and mentors, because they've helped me realize all the other areas of scale and growth that I hadn't appreciated before.
Nice. So when you were at 6 figures, you went, okay, I want to reach 7. What changes did you have to make in order to be able to realize that?
Team. It's 100% a case of team. So it is possible for someone who is solo with a few staff, a few VAs potentially, to get to 7 figures. I know people that have done that. Eventually what happens is you end up imploding, because you can't sustain that level of activity for long enough. The only exceptions would be if you have extraordinary levels of traffic. So for example, if you're a huge YouTuber, or you have an outlandishly big Twitter account or something, through the law of large numbers, you can do multiple millions as a solo person. But leaving that aside, because that's not the norm and it's very difficult to replicate, what happens is that you can usually sustain mid 6 figures as a solo person plus a few VAs. It's team and building team that allows you to systematically grow, because the big shift from 6 to 7 figures is learning how to systematize the processes in finance, product, and marketing that actually make growth happen. And it's not possible to do that as a solopreneur. So from 6 to 7 figures, it's team, and then from 7 to 8 figures, it's another layer of team with different levels of management and a whole different attitude.
Nice. So we'll start with the 6 to 7 figures. I know there's a ton of different ways to do it. When you had your team, were you looking for experts in the industry? Were you looking for attitude that you could train the skill set to? What kind of aspects were you looking for when you hired?
I love this question, because it goes against the typical advice you hear in the industry is you've got to hire A players, you've got to hire rock stars. And if you're running a multinational company where you're hiring heads of division that are already doing 100 million in revenue, then yeah, you need some pretty serious people. Absolutely. Now, for people like me, who are growing education businesses, who have an audience of people who know, like, and trust what they do, who care about the methodology they use for their work, generally speaking, the way to continue to grow is by doing more of those things. It's not by suddenly parachuting in and running $1 billion of Facebook ads using some special hack. We want to do more of the kind of things that are already working. If you were to go out and hire, some ex-Facebook marketing person, typically they're going to come in with a lot of baggage. They have specific ways of doing things. They are going to be very career orientated. So they're only going to stick with you for, a year or two before they move on to their next job. And they're extremely expensive. And what this does is it puts a lot of pressure on that particular hire to perform. Because if you're hiring, a hotshot marketing person for 250 grand a year, or whatever it may be, plus all that baggage that comes with them, because they won't work alone, they need a team under them to support them, you can very easily be in the hole for 300-400 grand a year for just one position. And if you're not making a return on that investment very quickly, it puts a lot of financial pressure on the business and emotional pressure in the relationship between you guys as well. And that's not healthy for a business that is run by someone who's a creative, or who's passionate about their thing, who's interested in the lifestyle element of growth as well. So what I've always done is hired from within my audience. And the reason that that's so powerful is that people who are in your audience already know and understand what you do. And what that means is whenever they're representing you in touch points with customers or new hires or whatever, they are going to be an extension of you and the energy that you have within your business. And that counts for a huge amount when it comes to brand reputation. They also tend to be cheaper, because for a lot of people who are in your audience, the opportunity to come and work with you is like the opportunity of a lifetime. And they're not asking for an A player market rates. You can get people like this for a very reasonable salary. But also they tend to stick around for longer. And this is one of the most important parts. Someone who joins for passion because they love what you do, most likely they're making a decision when they join you that this is going to be a real net positive for their life. It's remote work. It's a good salary. It's doing something they enjoy. Typically, they are then going to stay with you for a long, long time, because why would they move on to something else? And what this does is this allows you as the business to actually play for time. And so the more that time passes with stability in your team, this allows you to grow, to create this institutional knowledge that allows you to not just grow, but grow very sustainably and authentically. So I'm a huge proponent of hiring from within your audience.
Nice. Typically, I find, and I totally get that, I mean, 1 million is an arbitrary number, but typically at that point, there becomes this turning point where you want to go to 5 million and 10 million. And in that, you mentioned kind of a middle management stage, and some people go into outsourcing, some people go into fractional CFOs, or like that C-suite level, to be able to get the expertise that they need, kind of a needle injection to be able to. And then once they're at the 10 million, it's like, yeah, okay, we need a CFO and it needs to be full-time. This is ridiculous. And you outgrow the temporary injections. When people are looking at that, what do you see as kind of the thing that they need to change themselves when they go, okay, we need middle management?
So there's a fundamental difference between 6 to 7 and 7 to 8. And that is that from 6 to 7, you're making a one order of magnitude leap from, let's say you're making 200 grand a year to $1 million a year. You're adding 800 grand to the business revenue. Now, if you want to go from $1 million to 10 million, you're doing that same leap 10 times. It's a huge amount. People, I think it's difficult. People don't appreciate the leap that's involved in going from 1 million to 10 million. That's a lot of zeros, right there. And so from 6 to 7, you can add on, grow gradually, and get to 7 figures. And as long as you keep going, you're going to get there eventually. That same dynamic doesn't work going from 7 to 8 figures. It's just too slow. Dynamics often, opportunities that you have in your marketing or in your processes tend to cap out before you can get to that higher level. And so to move from 7 to 8 figures, the thing that you've got to do is invest heavily into that infrastructure. And so the behavioral side of this for the entrepreneur is to say, right, I am committed to growing from 7 to 8 figures, and I'm prepared to invest what's necessary in order to get there. And so for pretty much every business, you're going to go through a period of, let's say you hit 7 figures with 30, 40% profit margins. You have to be willing to take that down to 10%. And invest that 20, 30% of margin, forego that, invest that into infrastructure, which is mostly going to be hires and experimentation to figure out what are the levers you can pull that can result in scale. And a lot of businesses will implode at this point because they get it wrong. They burn through too much cash because growth sucks cash at that level. And then they can end up retreating into their shell, sometimes going back to, this is when you start to hear people saying, oh, it was so much more fun when it was just me. And so they end up going back to that because it's just an easier life, right? Scaling from 7 to 8 figures it's a bitch. You've really got to be cut out for it. And it's not for everybody. And so you have to go into that understanding what it's going to take, understanding that you're going to put yourself in financially very trying positions. Of course, if you get it right, then there's a big reward waiting at the end, potentially. But then maybe not, because do you really want a $10 million business with 10% profit margins? It's not great, honestly. So psychologically, it's like chalk and cheese.
So is there anything that you would have done differently in order in that growth phase? So from startup to it running in the way it does right now, is there anything in particular that you would have done different?
Everything. I mean, it's one of those things where there's so much pain involved, but at the same time, you wouldn't be where you are without having gone through that. I think my headline thought here is that you don't need to reinvent the wheel. And it's very, very easy if you're operating in a silo as an entrepreneur, to think you have to figure out everything yourself. The times when I've made the biggest leaps forward myself personally have been when I've had a mentor who is 5-10 years ahead of me, who's done the thing that I'm trying to achieve, that's always been the person that's managed to unlock things for me. And more often than not, it's a question of mindset. It's a question of my own limiting beliefs or my own mindset, not seeing the opportunity, because we forget, if you're a six-figure entrepreneur, you don't know how a seven-figure entrepreneur behaves. You've not been there. It's unreasonable to expect that you would know how to do that. So how are you going to do? You're just going to read a load of books. That's a good start. But what's important to understand is that there are people that you can have access to today for a price normally, but you can have access to those people today who will be able to tell you, look, here are the 3 things you're doing wrong. Here are the 3 things you have to focus on. And, and I'll help you do that. And that is the path of least resistance. And it illuminates the path forward, whilst also giving you a therapist of sorts to talk to when things do get difficult. So I would 100% go back and do whatever I could to work with people who had done that before.
Love it. So in a minute, I'm going to ask you to give us an example of one of your Cinderella stories, but I'm going to pause us for a second and we will be right back.
Are you running a business over 7 figures but still struggling with technology headaches? Pay attention, you do not want to miss this offer. This podcast episode is brought to you by Awareness Strategies, who is offering a custom-built digital adoption roadmap for anyone running a business over 7 figures who's wanting to grow their business in the next 5 years. And it's not just a roadmap, they offer full implementation as well if that scares the out of you. Check out awarenessstrategies.com/roadmap for more details today. The link's in the show's notes. Don't regret not doing this. Do it now. That's awarenessstrategies.com/roadmap.
Awesome. So if you could tell us a Cinderella story of one of your clients.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't have clients as such because I don't really work with people in that way, but I help a lot of different business owners, mostly through my network and through people that I come into contact with. And so probably the fastest that I've seen and kind of helped directly with someone transform was I'm not going to say the name because I don't know how public they make their own finances, but it's someone in the education space who has a pretty sizable YouTube following, and they teach. And so together with a friend of mine, we actually worked on helping them build a set of educational assets, because for YouTubers, the big risk for YouTubers is that they're very, very dependent on YouTube, on the algorithm. So they can make a lot of money doing brand deals and AdSense, but if YouTube goes down, their revenue goes down. So it was, I'd say, probably about 18 months ago now. What we looked to do was to build them a very straightforward set of online courses that they could offer to their audience. And what we essentially did was we took the model of my business StoryLearning, with its front-end offers, its standalone offers, its continuity products, and we took that exact same model and we started to build out courses in this particular YouTuber's space. And he actually hired someone to work full-time on building these things out. And within about 9 months, they were doing 7 figures in revenue just from that course business. And the key was, the reason it worked so well was that, first of all, he had a lot of traffic to begin with, and that obviously helps. Step 1, get 5 million YouTube subscribers. It's a bit of a cheat code,
and then you get overnight success after that.
And then the overnight success story that took 10 years. But what we did very well was that there was a very clear line from the value that they were going to him on YouTube for, through to what they then wanted to learn. And the reason that we were able to get the revenue level up so high was because we created the ability to spend lots of money through repeat purchases right from the start. And that's something that often people really don't understand. People try to, they focus on maximizing revenue on the front end, whereas in every case, the real money is on the back end. Because once you have a customer, what's that stat that everyone peddles around? It's something like 14 times easier to sell something to someone who's already a customer than it is to get a new customer. And so we were able to not only get people who were spending money right away, but were continuing to spend money because we designed the products in such a way that you had step 1, step 2, step 3. So you get repeat purchases, but then we were also able to sell bundles of things for higher ticket amounts. And so, yeah, in this world, things can happen very, very quickly if you have a framework that works.
Nice. And now you are just being a information philanthropist and giving people free information and
Yeah, so right now
I love it.
This confuses people a lot because I get emails from people all the time saying, I want to buy your course and I don't have one. And so essentially what I'm doing right now is like, I decided about a year ago that I wanted to use this knowledge. And in a way, I found that the business knowledge that I developed over the last 10 years of building my language business is actually far more valuable than the language knowledge I have in my head. And so I decided that I wanted to sort of start this new phase of my life, my career, where I'm actually helping people to grow their own businesses. And so I started a newsletter. It's at ollyrichards.co. And all I do every week, I write a long form piece about something that's working inside my business, something I'm thinking about. And that can be anything from, mindset around money, because money messes a lot of people up, through to how to make better decisions, through to how to write email sequences that sell high ticket things. Whatever. Basically, I can take the stuff that I'm working on in my other businesses and I just write about that stuff. And I'm growing my audience for some future endeavors.
Nice. So I am totally making up and coining information philanthropist right now, and I'm totally going to spread that around the world. I think everybody should become an information philanthropist.
Nice. Yeah, become a teacher. I guess is another way to say it. Fantastic.
Awesome. So peeps, we will of course have Olly's link in the show notes, but ollyrichards.co, and open up in a new browser, of course, because we're not done yet. So I get to ask you, Olly, at what point in life did you know you were especially kind of crazy enough to think that you could become an entrepreneur?
I think I had inklings of this right back at the start I remember when I was in high school, secondary school, as we call it in the UK. I remember talking with a friend and we wanted to start up this little web design agency and build websites for people. We never did because I never bothered to learn how to code. A few years later, when I was a professional jazz musician, I took us to these kind of wedding shows, and we would like have our little jazz quartet there playing jazz in the wedding show, because we wanted to get booked for gigs at weddings and things. So I think I've always had this bone in my body which wants to make things happen. I think I didn't get along all that well in the analog world, but I think 15, 20 years after that, when I kind of had the passion reignite and then the internet existed, I think that suited me down to the ground. And so as when I started that blog back in the day and actually set my mind to it, I was able to keep it up. And I think that's ultimately why I was able to make something good happen. But I do feel like I've always had that way of thinking, that way of being.
Love it. You have been absolutely awesome. Any last words for our peeps?
Well, I would say I always come out with cliches when people ask me this any last word questions. No, I think that
who doesn't love a good cliche?
One of the things that I have personally been thinking about a lot recently is the importance of doing things in your business that make you feel fulfilled. Because I've been lucky enough to have a fair amount of success, and through doing that, I've realized that the money that I always thought was so important actually does very, very little to fulfill you ultimately. And so I spend a lot of my time now thinking about how do I want to create a life that's full of things that I enjoy and that enriches me personally. So I always encourage people to think just as much about that as just pure growth on the business. Big cliche. I know I did warn you it was going to be a cliche, but there you go.
Tell you, they're cliches for a reason. We love them. Yeah. You've been absolutely awesome. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it immensely, and I know how valuable it is.
It's been a load of fun. Thank you. And great questions as well. I appreciate that.
Peeps, this is Michelle Nedelec. Thank you for being here with us today. Be sure to subscribe to the show, share it with your friends. We love helping entrepreneurs grow. Thank you for listening to 7 to 8. If you're interested in upping your speaking game, be sure to connect with our guests with the links in the show notes and connect with me to see how we can help you get your tech done for you and help your speaking dreams come true.